Welcome back to the Vybrational Stage Podcast. This is a space where we step beneath the surface of the challenges we experience, not to accumulate more information, but to become curious about the deeper patterns that quietly shape the way we experience our lives. Earlier this week, we explored a recognition that resonates with far more people than we often realize. I don't know what matters anymore. At first glance, that sentence can feel unsettling. It can sound like confusion, like burnout, like loss, like something has gone wrong. But what if this experience isn't a problem to solve? What if it's actually evidence that something old is beginning to dissolve? Because here's what I've begun to notice. Most people don't suddenly lose clarity. Most people slowly begin questioning clarity they never consciously chose. And that leads us into today's exploration. If I don't know what matters anymore, who taught me what was supposed to matter in the first place? That question may seem simple, but it has the potential to quietly change everything. Because almost everything we call important was learned before it was ever examined. The invisible curriculum. None of us entered this world with a 5-year strategic plan. No infant worries about career progression. No toddler compares their income. No child naturally believes that they need to prove their worth through productivity. Those ideas arrive later, quietly, gradually, almost invisibly. We inherited them, sometimes through words, more often through observation. We watched what adults celebrated. We noticed what received praise. We learned which emotions were welcomed and which ones made other people uncomfortable. Without realizing it, we absorbed an invisible curriculum. Achievement equals value. Being busy equals importance. Sacrifice equals love. Productivity equals worth. Certainty equals strength. Success equals happiness. No one necessarily intended to teach these lessons. Most people were simply passing along what they themselves had inherited. Generation after generation, culture after culture, organization after organization, until eventually these ideas stopped feeling like beliefs. They started feeling like reality itself. The stories we never questioned. One of the remarkable characteristics of the human mind is its ability to normalize repetition. If we hear something enough, we stop recognizing it as a story. It simply becomes the way things are. For example, perhaps you grew up believing that successful people never rest, or that responsible people always put themselves last. Maybe you learned that asking for help is weakness, or that slowing down means falling behind, or that your value depends upon how much you accomplish. Notice something? None of these are universal truths. They're interpretations, stories. Yet because they were introduced early, they became invisible, like water to a fish. You don't notice the water when you've never experienced anything else. And so we spend decades trying to become the kind of person that stories promise will finally feel complete. Only to discover completion never arrives, because no external achievement can permanently satisfy an identity built upon endless becoming. That isn't personal failure, it's simply how borrowed identities work. Becoming someone. Perhaps one of the most fascinating questions we ever ask ourselves is this: who have I spent my life trying to become? Not professionally, not socially, existentially. Who have I been trying to become? The impressive one, the dependable one, the intelligent one, the indispensable one, the successful one, the selfless one. the one who never disappoints anyone. Notice that these aren't merely behaviors, they're identities. And identities have an extraordinary power. Once an identity forms, our attention begins organizing reality around protecting it. If I believe I must always appear competent, mistakes become threats. If I believe my worth depends upon achievement, rest becomes uncomfortable. If I believe people must approve of me, authenticity becomes risky. Slowly, life becomes less about experiencing reality and more about maintaining the person I believe I have to be. We don't even notice the shift because it happens one small decision at a time. Until eventually, we no longer know whether we're living our lives or performing them. End of part 1. Part 2. Professional success is a powerful teacher. If you're listening to this podcast, there's a good chance you've spent a significant portion of your life striving to build something meaningful. Perhaps you've built a business, led an organization, managed teams, raised a family, built a career, or dedicated yourself to serving others. None of these things are inherently problematic. In fact, they can be beautiful expressions of who we are. The question isn't whether achievement is good. The question is whether achievement quietly became the place where we look to discover who we are. There is a subtle but profound difference. Achievement as an expression of your life creates energy. Achievement as a definition of your life eventually creates exhaustion. Many executives don't become burned out because they work hard. They become burned out because somewhere along the way their identity fused with their performance. The quarterly numbers stopped being numbers. They became a reflection of personal worth. The promotion stopped being an opportunity. It became validation. The recognition stopped being appreciation. It became proof. And when our sense of self depends upon external outcomes, every success brings temporary relief but never lasting peace. Because relief always asks for another achievement tomorrow. The quiet contract we never signed. Imagine for a moment that throughout your life you've been handed an invisible contract. No one ever asked you to sign it. No one ever told you it existed. Yet somehow you've been living by its terms. It sounds something like this. If I accomplish enough, then I'll finally feel enough. If I earn enough, then I finally relax. If I become successful enough, then I finally feel secure. If enough people respect me, then I'll finally believe in myself. The contract is seductive because it promises fulfillment, but it never actually delivers it. It simply postpones it. Always one more milestone away, one more accomplishment, one more degree, one more title, one more investment, one more client, one more recognition. And because the goalposts continue moving, the finish line never arrives. Not because you're failing, but because the contract itself was never designed to end. It survives by convincing us that fulfillment always exists somewhere in the future. How culture teaches us what to chase. Culture rarely tells us what matters directly. Instead, it teaches us what deserves attention. Think about how early we begin measuring life. Grades, awards, athletic performance, college admissions, income, house ownership, promotions, followers, influence, recognition, productivity. Every system around us is designed to measure something. Again, measurement isn't inherently wrong. Businesses require metrics. Organizations need accountability. Goals create direction. But here's where we become curious. What happens when we unconsciously confuse what can be measured with what actually matters? Love doesn't fit neatly into a spreadsheet. Presence doesn't appear on a performance review. Wonder cannot be qualified. Inner peace doesn't improve quarterly earnings. Compassion rarely wins awards. Yet these are often the very qualities people long for after spending decades pursuing measurable success. It's fascinating. We become incredibly skilled at optimizing the measurable while quietly starving the immeasurable. The family stories we continue living. Some of the deepest definitions of success aren't taught in boardrooms. They're learned around kitchen tables. Perhaps your family celebrated hard work above everything else. Perhaps they prized financial security because they had once lived without it. Perhaps achievement became the language through which love was expressed. Not because anyone intended harm, but because every generation passes along what helped them survive. Parents teach what they know. Grandparents teach what shaped them. Communities reinforce what they collectively believe. Until eventually, the story becomes so familiar that no one remembers where it began. Many of us are living lives organized around solving problems that belong to previous generations. We inherited fears, inherited ambitions, inherited definitions of success, inherited anxieties, inherited expectations. Not because anyone wished to burden us, but because human beings naturally pass along both wisdom and conditioning. The beautiful thing is this: once we become aware of an inherited story, we are no longer unconsciously living inside it. Awareness creates choice. Comparison, the fastest way to lose yourself. One of the strongest reinforcements of borrowed meaning is comparison. Comparison convinces us that our lives should resemble someone else's. It whispers, "You're behind. You should be further along. Look what they've accomplished. You're missing something." The remarkable thing about comparison is that it doesn't require facts. It only requires imagination. We compare our internal experience to someone else's external presentation. We compare our struggle to their highlights, our uncertainty to their confidence, our beginning to their middle. And slowly, without realizing it, we begin organizing our lives around someone else's definition of success. But here's the irony. The person we're comparing ourselves to may be doing the exact same thing. They may also be wondering why their accomplishments no longer satisfy them. They may be also quietly asking what actually matters. Comparison doesn't reveal reality, it simply amplifies insecurity. The cost of living someone else's definition. There comes a point in many people's lives when something begins to feel strangely unfamiliar. Everything looks successful, yet something feels absent. The career is established. The family is beautiful. The responsibilities are being handled. The calendar is full. The achievements are real. Yet there's a quiet question that refuses to disappear. Why doesn't this feel the way I thought it would? That question often scares us because we assume it means we're ungrateful or selfish or broken. But perhaps it means none of those things. Perhaps it simply means that the life you built has outgrown the assumptions upon which it was built. Perhaps the discomfort isn't asking you to abandon your life. Perhaps it's inviting you to inhabit your life differently. To stop living primarily from inherited expectations and begin living from direct experience. That shift is subtle, but it changes everything because instead of asking what should matter, you begin asking, what do I actually experience when I'm fully present? And surprisingly, That question has no borrowed answer, only your own. Transition to part 3. In the final part of today's conversation, we'll explore one of the most liberating discoveries we can make. What if clarity isn't something we create? What if clarity is what naturally begins to emerge when the borrowed stories become quiet? We'll discuss why nothing essential about you has ever been lost, and why the capacity to experience life directly has been patiently waiting beneath every role, every identity, and every expectation you've ever carried. Perhaps nothing essential has ever been missing. As we begin to bring today's exploration to a close, I'd like to invite you into a possibility that, if allowed to settle deeply, can fundamentally change the way you relate to your entire life. What if the clarity you've been searching for has never actually disappeared? What if it's simply been obscured? Think about standing beside a beautiful mountain lake. When the surface is calm, the water reflects everything with astonishing clarity. The sky, the trees, the mountains, the reflection doesn't have to be created. It simply appears when the water becomes still. Now imagine the same lake during a windstorm. The reflection seems to disappear. But did it actually disappear? Or did the movement simply make it impossible to see what has always been there? I wonder if our lives work much the same. Perhaps beneath the movement of constant striving, beneath comparison, beneath inherited expectations, beneath endless thinking, there's always been a quiet clarity waiting to reveal itself. Not because you created it, but because it's been a part of your very nature. Perhaps nothing essential has ever been missing. Returning to direct experience. When we were children, life was experienced before it was interpreted. A butterfly wasn't valuable because it increased our productivity. It simply inspired wonder. Rain wasn't an inconvenience. It was something to dance in. A walk through the woods wasn't exercise. It was exploration. A conversation wasn't networking. It was connection. Life was experienced directly. Then, gradually, something changed. We began evaluating experiences instead of simply having them. We learned to ask, is this productive? Is this advancing my career? Is this efficient? Will this help me succeed? Again, there's nothing inherently wrong with these questions. They're useful questions, but they make proof foundations for meaning of life. Because a meaningful life isn't built solely on efficiency. It's built on presence. The executive who experiences genuine fulfillment isn't necessarily the one who accomplishes the most. It's often the one who has rediscovered how actually being where they are. To fully inhabiting conversation. To enjoy a sunrise without feeling guilty for not answering emails. To listen without preparing a response. To eat without rushing. To walk without trying to arrive somewhere else. To live instead of constantly preparing to live. The freedom beyond identity. Earlier today, we asked an important question. Who taught me what was supposed to matter? Now I'd like to ask you another. Who are you if you no longer need to protect the identity you've spent your entire life constructing? That can feel like a frightening question because identities create familiarity. Even exhausting identities can feel safer than uncertainty. But perhaps this isn't about losing your identity. Perhaps it's about allowing identity to become more fluid. Instead of saying, I am my career, you begin saying, I currently serve through this career. Instead of, I am successful because of what I produce, perhaps I create because creating expresses something alive within me. Notice the difference? One requires constant protection. The other allows freedom. One says your value depends upon outcomes. The other recognizes that your value existed long before any outcome ever occurred. That isn't a motivational slogan, it's a recognition. Before your first accomplishment, before your first performance review, before your first success, before your first failure, you already possess the capacity to love, to wonder, to create, to learn, to connect. Those qualities weren't earned. They were expressed. And what is expressed can never be taken away in the way accomplishments can. An experiment rather than another goal. As we conclude today, I'd like to offer something different. Not another strategy, not another habit, not another productivity system. Simply an experiment. For the next several days, notice how often your mind tells you what should matter. Notice how frequently it evaluates, categorizes, measures, ranks, compares. Don't argue with it. Don't judge it. Just become curious. And then, several times each day, gently ask yourself one question. Without consulting my thoughts, what am I directly experiencing right now? Perhaps you notice your breathing, the warmth of the sun on your skin, the sound of birds outside your office, the laughter of someone you love, the feeling of gratitude after finishing meaningful work, the quiet satisfaction of simply being present. These moments seem almost too ordinary to matter. Yet perhaps that is precisely why they matter so much. Because life is always unfolded in ordinary moments, not merely in milestones, not only in promotions, not exclusively in achievements. Life has always been happening here, this moment, the only place it has ever happened. Today on the Vibe Shift blog. This week's exploration continues in the Vibe Shift blog, where we'll bring together everything we've uncovered throughout both podcasts. On the Vibe Shift podcast, we explored the practical challenge of recognizing when we've become disconnected from what truly matters and how to begin creating space for greater clarity in our everyday lives. Here on the Vybrational Stage Podcast, we've looked beneath that experience to understand how our definitions of meaning are often inherited from family, culture, achievement, and professional identity, and how those borrowed narratives can quietly shape the way we experience our entire lives. In the blog, these two conversations come together. Rather than simply asking what matters, or even what taught me what matters, we'll explore a deeper exploration. How do we consciously reclaim authorship of a meaningful life without rejecting the responsibilities, relationships, and commitments that genuinely matter? We'll introduce a practical yet deeply reflective framework for recognizing inherited definitions of success, releasing those that no longer serve you, and beginning to live from direct experience rather than unconscious obligation. If this week's conversation stirred something within you, I believe you'll find the blog to be the natural next step in your journey. Continue the exploration by following the link in the show notes. Closing. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Vybrational Stage Podcast. If today's conversation resonated with you, I invite you to carry just one question with you this week. Not what should matter, but what am I experiencing when I stop letting inherited stories answer that question for me? Because perhaps the life you've been searching for isn't waiting somewhere in the future. Perhaps it's been waiting quietly beneath every expectation, every comparison, every achievement, and every identity you've ever believed you had to become. Until next time, May you become just a little more curious, a little more present, and may you discover that beneath everything you've been taught to pursue, there has always been a quieter wisdom. One that has never asked you to become someone else, only to come home to the life that has been here all along. This is the Vibrational Stage Podcast, and remember, transformation doesn't begin when you discover something new about yourself. It begins when you stop overlooking what has always been true.